I'm a runner, and one of the things that I always think about is that they always say to runners, once you're thirsty, it's too late, you're already dehydrated. And I think that is a great analogy for family caregiving, is once you notice you're tired, or your health is failing, or you've gained 10 pounds, or you've missed your own medications for 3 days, or you didn't get time to go to a doctor's appointment, it is too late to fix.
Welcome to Aging Choices Unfiltered. I'm Terry Sullivan, the co-founder of Aging Choices, and I'm joined by Brenda Lamone. I've been having a great time working on these podcasts with Brenda, and I hope you're enjoying the shows and taking away some helpful tips.
Hi, Terry. We've had some great guests, and I've learned a lot. I'm really excited about addressing our topic today.
Awesome. So, in general, and Brenda, you have much more experience with this than I do, but being a caregiver can be overwhelming. But there are caregiver support options available to our listeners. And the question is, how do you find those options and what options are right for you? So that's what we're going to discuss on today's show. As Brenda, as you and I spoke about is, I had some very short-term caregiver experience with my grandmother when she had a knee replacement, but I've really never been in a situation where I'm caring for multiple family members, or I am the core caregiver for someone in our family, but you've had much more experience with that. Can you share with our listeners just a little bit about, and they've learned a little bit from our previous podcasts, but if you can just share a little bit about what you're going through as a caregiver, that would be great.
Sure. And as you said, we have talked about my family. I think everybody knows pretty much our backgrounds by now, but what's interesting is it sometimes it comes on slowly. Like I started taking over their finances and I started helping them with more and more things. And then sometimes it comes on like a freight train when, there's an event, something happens and you're instantly a caregiver. I kind of was more the first and I started helping them out. And then as my father declined, I really had to start taking on a lot more. And then adding in my 55 plus disabled sister, I took over the caregiving for her when my parents couldn't do it anymore. So I've got kind of the trifecta of caregiving. And, what's difficult is it's one thing if it was your full-time job, but when it's on top of raising your own family, starting a business, as we've said before, and I think I quoted my mother, let me explode so everybody can have a piece. Being a caregiver is not easy. We understand, and that's why we want to help you with some tips and resources. I want to welcome our guest for today's show, Molly Rowe, owner of FirstLight Home Care in Swampscott and Marblehead, Massachusetts. Molly, can you share a little bit about your background and the services that FirstLight Home Care offers, as well as how you got into the business?
Sure. Thanks, Brenda. Hi, Terry. As you mentioned, my husband, Steve, and I own FirstLight in Massachusetts in Swampscott, which is a non-medical home care company. I'll explain what non-medical means a little bit later for those who don't know. We started the business about 5 years ago. We really come at it from a family perspective. Like you, we've had some caregiving experiences in our family. Most recently, really right before we started the business and trying to care for Steve's father, which was over 2,000 miles away. And although I guess some would say, well, you're not caring for him in the house every day, I think being far away presents its own challenges. I think no matter what college degrees you have, what books you've read, even if you're in the business, even now in the business, you feel completely clueless when you're doing it for your own loved ones. And so that is what led us to doing it ourselves as a business. I think we thought, well, there's an opportunity here to help our friends and our family who are all going through it. And hopefully we can help make it better for them and for the seniors that we care for in their homes.
That's great. Do you want to talk a little bit about the services that you offer, Molly?
Sure. So for home care, so it's non-medical, as I said, there's medical home care, which is more home health, and there's non-medical, which for us really means companion care, but with a personal care twist. So we do everything from a 3-hour, once a week visit where we help someone with their grocery shopping or take them to a hair appointment or take them to bridge, do a lot of transportation, light housekeeping, changing the fitted sheet, which is always a tough one for people as they age. It's hard for me and as I aging. To sponge baths and toileting and dressing and caring for someone end of life in their bed. That's kind of the range of what we do, and those can be around the clock 24/7 clients that we do. So everything from 3-hour to 24-hour and all the stuff in between.
That's fantastic and really helpful. The focus of today's podcast and our focus today is on supporting caregivers. I think the term caregivers is used a lot on both sides, right? It could be a spouse, it could be a daughter, it could be a professional caregiver who goes in to support that aging adult. Can you just talk a little bit about that? And who are the caregivers out there? And just kind of break them into just our listeners so they understand, because it's caregivers used interchangeably a lot.
Well, and it's funny, when Brenda was talking, I was thinking about, caregivers. Some are financial caregivers. So you're taking on that role in your family and you're not caregiving, maybe in my definition for our business, but you're doing that, or you're doing the mental, emotional support, house management, handling the mail, or they're caregivers, the spouse who lives with her husband who has Alzheimer's disease, who is, keeping him safe 24 hours a day and making sure he's, not turning on the stove or wandering or doing something else that might hurt either or both of them. And then, of course, there's our professional caregivers, which our professional caregivers even have a range. They could be certified. We have a lot of CNAs and home health aides who've gotten certification. But we also have a lot of people who've done this for their family for years or who did it for a neighbor and decided to go take some courses and get the training from us. And often those caregivers are the most amazing, because I think they've come from it, in a personal, you get it more when you've done this personally, I think, and you get the whole family dynamic and what's involved. And I should just note, in Massachusetts, we're not, it's a non-licensure state. So in some states, a home care company would have to have both medical and non-medical services because they have the license, and they would only be able to hire CNAs and HHAs. In Massachusetts, we are able to hire what's called companions who don't have that certification.
That makes sense. And for our listeners, an HHA is?
A home health aide. And
Perfect.
It's a certified position.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, I've watched I've known Brenda for probably 12 plus years now. We've been good friends as well as partners and coworkers in the past. And Bren's been helping with her parents as well as her sister. And it was very interesting how you broke down the categories, right? Because she does a lot of different things, and it ranges from just having them to dinner at her home to helping with the finances. Why is it important for caregivers to take a break, to get some time to themselves, to take care of themselves?
Well, I'm a runner, and one of the things that I always think about is that they always say to runners, once you're thirsty, it's too late, you're already dehydrated. And I think that is a great analogy for family caregiving, is once you notice you're tired, or your health is failing, or you've gained 10 pounds, or you've missed your own medications for 3 days, or you didn't get time to go to a doctor's appointment, it is too late to fix. So I just think you will not notice it. You get an adrenaline rush from being everything to everybody and thinking, your head rushing. It's kind of like being a new mom sometimes, and what you have to do and schedule. You need to start the breaks before you notice that you're thirsty.
Very, very interesting.
Really good analogy. Yes. And I can definitely attest to that. I find myself saying, okay, stop. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Very interesting. So, and what you've seen, I know, in your business and supporting caregivers, what type of benefits do you see when a caregiver does have the opportunity to take a break, or does in fact make that effort to give themselves a little bit of space?
Well, I mean, I think you're a better everything. We always say in our business of home care, but I would think any senior care business says, what you have us do for you enables you to return to being what your original role was and should be, which is the daughter or the husband or the wife, or, you're better at those things, which those things fail when you go into caregiving. I think you're not as good at being just a daughter or just a wife. And, I will say though, when I'm talking to people, most people will say, I don't need those things. My health is fine. I'm not worried about me. The thing that usually convinces someone to get help is just thinking about worst case scenario if they were to end up in the hospital or getting a knee replacement or just, something happened and they couldn't get home. Having reinforcements in place and a backup plan is important. And it will make them better, caregivers.
Yeah, what I've seen with my sister's in-laws is her mother-in-law was caregiving the father-in-law, and she threw her back out because she was trying to lift him in and out of bed, and that's what happens. The caregiver, becomes incapacitated or hurt, just like you said, from trying to do too much, and then what happens? So you bring up a great point.
What are some of those things that cause maybe someone to go ahead and say, hey, I need some help here?
Well, toileting in general, hygiene, all of that is a big one. And one thing that's ironic as far as hygiene is a lot of people will say, I can't get my mom to shower. There's no way a stranger is going to be able to. They're always amazed that a stranger has better luck. And I think that's the thing inside all of us that is our instinct is to be polite usually. So I always tell people, even if you're not having luck, you're welcome to step away because probably a stranger is going to have better luck than you are. I think the other big one is, and this is, when you talk about, when you're deciding if you need the services, the other big one is sleep. I think when you have somebody who is up all night or up several times a night or requiring care throughout the night, you are not getting sleep. And most people can't go very long like that. So that is a big sign, I guess.
Oh yeah. I definitely saw that movie.
Yeah, that definitely happened to you, Bren, right?
Yeah.
It was like, do we continue to care for dad at home or do we look for some help?
Yep.
You chose the latter. Yeah. Really, really interesting. So clearly your expertise and your experience in your company is focused on home care, and you helped walk us through the differences between home health and companion care. Are there any other options that are out there for caregivers that they might just need a couple hours a week outside their home? Are there any other short-term care programs out there that could help consumers if they need it besides home care?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting at the most basic and inexpensive is local senior centers. Here in Swampscott, ours does not offer a drop-off program at all. But depending on your loved ones, if it's just that they can't drive, but they could go participate in an activity, they can go for a couple of hours and do a coffee or the lunch or many offerings. They do wine tastings and trips to the casino and all kinds of things. So I think starting with your senior council on aging or your senior centers in your towns is a great start. I think then, it's probably the next step is home care a few days a week or a day a week. Day programs are great for someone who has to work during the week or maybe just wants socialization. A lot of people do better at night when they've had a full day of purpose, and the day programs, which is like a adult day care, for lack of a better word. They go out of the home and they're there for 6 to 8 hours and they get their lunch there. Some have vans and buses that drive them there and back. And then I think you start getting into more out of the house residential options. Assisted living is the next stage where you need very limited hands-on care. You need laundry services, meal services, socialization, medication reminders. And then, onward up past that is when you start getting into more skilled care and long-term care facilities.
So it really depends on where someone is in their process and what they need. Can you tell our listeners if they started to engage with a home care provider, What is the process of working with your company, and what should they expect?
So usually it starts with a phone call. Most offices, I would say, one of the first things I'd look at in searching for a home care company is who answers the phone when you call the first time, and do they answer the phone?
Interesting.
A lot of family members call us at 4:00 on a Sunday on 4th of July, because that's when you're home, and that's when then what has hit the fan, and you just need to call. And so for us, we don't have an answering service. We have, we trade office on call, and we answer, and we know every client, and we know every prospect that's come in. Not every company is going to have that, but they should have someone who answers the phone and gets back to you pretty quickly, because that's what your service is going to be, going forward when you have an emergency or a complaint or something going on. Once we do the phone call, we talk through kind of what the situation is and whether it makes sense to set up a home visit. Home visit is absolutely free and non-obligation. It's really a chance for me as much to see where the setting is, whether my caregivers should be going in there, if there's pets, and also just to get the personality of the person we're going to be meeting with. I do think it's a matchmaking service as much as a caregiving service. So it's nice to get to know them a little bit and see the space that they live in and talk through the services we might provide there. And then if they want to move forward, there's paperwork, and we can usually get started pretty quickly. I always tell people, we have a lot of people who call us who needed to start yesterday. I'm big on setting realistic expectations at my meeting. Oftentimes my husband, who owns the company with me, he says I try to talk people out of using us more than I try to talk people into using us.
That's funny.
But I think you need to be realistic. No home care company is perfect. And if I don't set the expectations in the beginning, you're going to be disappointed. So if someone needs 24-hour care starting tonight, they're going to have several different faces that first week. There's no way around it. If someone can wait 2 weeks to get started, then I have more time to move my schedule around to find just that perfect person and get a regular person. If someone wants visits in the morning and visits at night, that's not going to be the same person. Most caregivers won't sit around all day and go back to the same house later on that night. So I think I look for honesty, and I'd rather have honesty and realism if I were a family than, painting a perfect picture of how we never make a mistake and you're going to get one caregiver and it's going to be just wonderful, because it's not usually perfect.
Molly, so many factors too go into finding the right caregiver. I mean, there's how far they have to travel, the schedule, like you said, and I'm also curious, how do you know when you found the perfect home health aide or caregiver? I know
we probably don't know for 90 days until they've worked for us for 90 days. I think that's when all the good, bad, and ugly comes out in that time. But in an interview, I mean, it's an interesting position to interview people for, because most people who are true nurturing caregivers are not the best in a one-on-one conversation with me or with, they're amazing when you put them in with a 90-year-old, but they're not so amazing sitting across from you at a table in a business office trying to wear their best outfit. So it's a gut thing, I think. Sometimes we'll interview someone and she'll just let out a laugh. I can think of one caregiver in particular who's been with us almost since we started, and she just let out a laugh, and I thought, it is the warmest, rolling, bubbly, perfect laugh. I think she's going to be a great caregiver. And she was and is.
Yeah.
We obviously, we do drug testing, we do background checking, we call references, but you really don't know until that first day we introduce all our caregivers. So it's can be one of the best parts of my job or the worst when I first day walk them through the door and I say, this is Bob, your client today. I love to see the caregiver who changes, her whole personality changes into this amazing person that I didn't know existed until that moment. And sometimes there's not a perfect match, and then we go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I imagine I guess the question would be is, even for our listeners out there that might actually be seniors themselves or daughters, and maybe they're thinking about getting into the workforce. Is there any particular age or type that you look for to help with home caregiving?
No. I mean, I think type is they have to be reliable. It's just not a job for somebody who has a lot of other obligations or issues in their life, which is hard because we all have them. And I think sometimes the most generous of people are people who have a lot of things going on that allow them to get to their jobs. So, and that's not an insult to them. It's just, this isn't a good position for them. It's, we had I'll never forget these two Italian, Irish Catholic ladies, sisters, 98 and 100, and lived together their whole lives, and said, I want a 50-something Irish Catholic caregiver. And I said, well, I can't promise you. I will, I'm not, I don't promise a color. I don't promise a religion. I promise you a good personality fit. And the person that was a good personality fit was probably a 27-year-old African-American woman who grew up in the inner city of Boston. And they loved her. Like, she just had the spunk and feistiness of a 50-something Irish Catholic. But it didn't come in the body they expected. So, it's no way. It's not an age thing. There's no way to say who the typical caregiver is, I guess.
Yeah. What's the total typical hours a typical caregiver would work for an agency like yours? Depend.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no typical in home care. So we have some caregivers who work one day a week for 3 hours, and that's all they want to do because of kids in school or being retired or, requirements of their Social Security. They can't earn too much. And then we have others who want 40 hours a week. So it's all over.
Interesting. Brenda, before we go into the cost of home care, I do have one more question. And it came up on a podcast that we did yesterday, I think it was yesterday, where some listeners out there or families out there might be thinking, I don't like the idea of having somebody in my home that's not part of my family, and that would take a little getting used to. Could you talk to folks out there that might be thinking that on how you address that or how that works? And it may be simply, if you need help, someone needs to be in your home, but are there any ways in which you talk to consumers about that?
I usually start by saying that I will one day be our worst client. I hate people in my house. I like to walk through the door, take a breath, and have nobody there. I don't want to feel like I'm entertaining. And so we talk a lot about, this is not a guest. This is not someone you need to entertain. We have heard it all and seen it all. You can say, you sit there, I'm going to go upstairs. You set the rules and the groundwork for the most part, and we follow it. So, that's one thing I say. I also say, we work really hard. And when I say the matchmaking thing, it sounds cliche and perfect, but, as my husband would say, I'm rarely saying the best part of what we do. I think that we do work really hard to be someone you enjoy being around. And if it's not someone you enjoy being around, or that your stomach gets in knots before they show up, then it's not a good fit. I believe the good fit exists for everybody. It's just trying to find it.
Makes sense. That makes sense.
So when somebody's budgeting for this is always a big question. And I'm also curious if there are some limits on how much time you look for, or, it's an hourly rate, and how is it priced, and what are people's options for, minimal and maximum. I believe you even said, it can be 24 hours, but there's a difference between 24-hour and live-in, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. If you could talk about the budgeting for it and that, it would be terrific.
So most home care companies in Massachusetts, and, I should say that it will vary greatly across the United States what the rates are in different places. But for Massachusetts, I would say the hourly rate usually runs between $28 and $35, depending on the services that someone needs, oftentimes the amount of time you have them there. Some companies will say if you have a caregiver for less than 6 hours, it's going to be one rate per hour. And if it's more, it'll be another. We try to keep it simple. We have one rate hourly and we have a 3-hour minimum. Our rate does not change depending on whether it's an overnight or whether it's weekend or daytime. It changes on major holidays. But other than that, it's one hourly rate, and that's all it is. Live-in care, so this, it would be the same rate for a 24/7 client as it would be for a 3-hour client. Just on the 3-hour client, the reason people have minimums, if you look at it, I mean, we used to have a 2-hour minimum and just found we could not staff it. That was the most common called off shift. And it's, when you think about it and it's a snowy morning in Massachusetts and someone has to get up, warm their car up, scrape their car off, to go somewhere for an hour or 2 hours, it's not worth their while. So that's why most have a minimum of some sort. We kind of went with 3 because it's the least amount of time we could have, but still have people, show up to their jobs and not mind scraping their cars off in the winter. So the 24-hour, for us would be the same. For a live-in client, it's usually much less. We don't do live-in. A lot of companies do not do live-in anymore. From a labor law perspective, it's a lot harder to manage, making sure someone gets, doesn't go into overtime, gets their 6 to 8 hours uninterrupted time, has a bedroom of their own. Most people who need 24-hour care wake up through the night. That's why you're having someone come there 24 hours. So a live-in is not usually a realistic option. I also find, just from a hiring perspective, I like caregivers who go home at night and have a plant or dog or a husband or kids, something to keep alive and to care for at home, some sort of life. I find that people who have no home and no reason to go home aren't as ideal from an employment standpoint. So that's why we don't do live-ins. Just talking about, since we did talk about some of the other programs, just to put that in the scope of things. So if you're doing the math, a 24/7 client is going to cost probably $16,000 a month. So that's a lot of money, obviously, for a family if they're going to have 24/7 care for very long. A day program where they were out of the home for the day would be probably less expensive. I can't give you the exact numbers, but it's not going to be the same hourly. It's definitely going to be less expensive. An assisted living, depending on the services they need, would probably be between $6,500 and $10,000. So if you ask the question, why would anyone ever hire a 24/7 for anything long term? If you have a couple who's going to have to go to an assisted living and maybe cost more than $10,000 each, it is more cost effective to live at home with 24-hour care. But you have to take all those things into thought as you're kind of planning this out. Long term, what you can afford, and if there are 2 people or 1, how many hours you're going to need, all of those things.
And sometimes even with someone who comes out from the hospital and maybe it's 24/7, but it's for a short term.
Right. A lot of ours is, 3 days of overnights just to see where we're at, to make sure they're safe getting up out of the bed and walking to the bathroom. And then we'll, transition to day care, or opposite. We do just overnights with a lot of people, and then their family takes over in the daytime.
That's where I found it very difficult. I went and had to stay at my mom's when we brought my dad home because he was up all through the night. And I didn't want my mother to get injured trying to help him in and out. And so, but that was when we needed the most help, and that was the most difficult. So I can see why that would be needed. But it would have been for a short term, because then we did get him into memory care, which was the best fit for him. But it would have been a great stopgap, or for that short term, it would have been great to have someone there for a few days. So, and I can see that.
Molly, just, before we wrap up, I think that often when we come from inside the industry, we tend to use certain language. And one of the things we're trying to do is just be more educational for consumers. And very often the word private pay is used with regards to paying for home care services. So would you mind just talking about, private pay is basically you're paying out of your pocket for that. And are there any benefits that could help consumers paying for home care, or is it mainly what we call private pay?
Yeah, well, so non-medical, as we're talking about, is always going to be private pay.
Yep.
If you're discharged from a hospital and you've had a hospital stay, you are usually sent home with some sort of home care. So you can get, a 1-hour home health visit. Sometimes they help with some more things in the home while they're there, and that's usually covered by your insurance. But the caregiver is tired and needs help problem is usually not solved by anything paid for by medical insurance. There are people who have long-term care policies that will pay for almost all of the options you have. The only thing I would say about that is you really need to have someone, and I do this with people, I look at their policies and just, a lot of times it will say, I have, a lady who called and she said, I have a 30-day elimination period. And so I can, as soon as I'll do one visit a week for 30 days, and in a month, I'll be ready to go. Well, if you dig into most policies, the elimination 30 days is actually 30 visits. So she basically started crying when she learned that it's actually going to take, a lot more time than her one visit a week for 30 days that she thought she was going to be able to do. So you have to know what the policy is and what's covered. And then, of course, there's veterans benefits for people who qualify for those. I do recommend people go through a third-party provider for veterans benefits, because navigating it is so difficult, and finding the paperwork and proof and all the things that you're eligible for that you don't know you're eligible for. So there's a lot of third-party vendors where you can call. If you just did a Google search on veterans benefits home care, you'll get 1 million. And you can call them up and they do an initial intake to figure out if you're even qualified, and then go from there. There's a little fee to go with it, but like I said, it saves the headache of having to go through it yourself.
Yeah, I think it's important to note on that. If you go to the VA website, they do list the accredited, I should say, the accredited veterans benefits assistance. It is a great benefit. People don't realize it's available, and it's definitely worth exploring. That's a great point.
This has been amazing, Molly. How can our listeners learn a little bit more about your services?
They can go on the web. It's get your pens out because it's a long one. It's www.northshore.firstlighthomecare.com. So there's 2 dots in there. You've got www.northshore.firstlighthomecare.com. As I said, we're also open 24 hours, 7 days a week for phone calls. And I always tell families, Steve and I started this really to help guide other people, because we felt like idiots, and we know everybody does. And so even if someone is calling and just saying, hey, I want to know assisted living versus long-term care, I'm happy to talk through those things with people. And I think most home care companies would be happy to. The key, I think, when you need help is pick up the phone and call somebody.
Yeah.
It's a compassionate industry, you hope, and I hope. And so for the most part, you should find people who are willing to guide you in the right direction, even if it's not the business that you're calling.
Perfect. Great. Thanks again, Molly Rowe, owner of FirstLight Home Care in Swampscott and Marblehead, Massachusetts, for joining the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great.
Thank you for joining today. You won't want to miss our next episode. We'll be joined by Victoria Archibald, owner of Care Patrol Metro Atlanta, as we discuss tips for a successful senior living search. And please don't be a stranger to the show. We want to hear from you. This isn't just our show about senior care options. This is your show. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Aging Choices, and Twitter at My Aging Choices, and tell us what topics you'd like to talk about. And please, by all means, visit agingchoices.com for a full library of senior care resources and our Choice Wizard. Explore, review, select senior care, aging care, and service options for free with our Choice Wizard. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the podcast.